Xin chào tất cả các cháu đã quay trở lại kênh của bà Tân về lớp.
Ui, nhầm rồi. Xin chào tất cả các bạn. Tôi tên là Brian. Tôi dạy tiếng Anh. Hãy học tiếng Anh cùng tôi nhé. Hôm nay chúng ta sẽ học về IELTS academic writing. Okay, so today we're going to look at a sample writing IELTS writing task, and the question for this one reads as follows. So the chart below, reading over here, the chart below shows the number of men and women in further education in Britain in 3 periods, and whether they were studying full-time or part-time. Okay, so let's have a look at what all of this means. So the number, how many men and women in further education. So further education, you have when you're very young, you learn in primary school, primary education. Secondary education is high school. Until you're about 18, you graduate from high school, and then you go to further education, that is university. Okay, and we're talking about Britain, England, in 3 periods. Okay, so a period is basically another word is like a time period. So we're looking at whether they're studying full-time or part-time. Okay, full-time, you go to lectures every day for many hours every day. Part-time, you study only a few hours and maybe not every day. Okay, so let's look at this. All these words here. We have in this chart we have the number of men. Okay, male is from same as men, and female. Women are female. Men are male. Woman. And now let's look at what this chart stands for. So the black bars are for students in full-time education, and the grey are part-time. And this is the men and women in further secondary university education in thousands. Okay, so we have 200,000, 400,000, 600,000, and all of that. So our task is to summarize the information, all this information, by selecting and reporting the main features, okay, and make comparisons where relevant. So summarize, we're going to look at all of this and write a short passage on it. We're going to look at the main features. We're going to look at how these are mainly different from each other. See? Which has more and when, the main features. And we're going to look at we're going to make some comparisons where relevant, meaning where it makes sense to make comparisons. We'll make some comparisons. We'll see what is the same and what is different. So let's have a quick look at the whole chart in general. Very quickly we see this trend over here. In the female side, we see a sharp increase. In the male side, we see a very, very funny pattern there. In the grey are part-time students. Okay, with the full-time students, we see a different trend. So over here, we see that both the male and female side are increasing in terms of full-time education. And so if we get to writing, now our task is to write at least 150 words. So let's get to writing. Please grab a pen and paper and write along with me. Okay, So when writing, we can start with an opening statement. We can say something like a summary of men and women in further education in 3 periods. So let's have a look at the chart again, and let's compare. So we'll compare these 3 periods, these 3 time periods, from the 1970s with the first period, the 1980s is the second period, and the 1990s, the third period, for which we have data, and whether studying full-time or part-time. So let's just have a look at the first period in both cases. We can say in the 1970s, with both the male and the female group, we can say in the 1970s there were about, there we go, 1,000 thousands, a million. There were about 1 million males enrolled in the grey and part-time education, and we can see this here, that this line, the female, is just under 800,000. So we can say that, and just under 800,000 females enrolled in further education. So let's type that out. We can say in the 1970s, there were about, we can say 1 million men enrolled in further education, whereas, it's like a but or a, there were this many, whereas, like but, there were only, whereas there were less than 800,000 females. Okay, less than 800,000 females enrolled in further education. Okay, now we've got to look at whether that was full-time or part-time education. Okay, grey, so it was part-time education. So we can add that in. 1 million men enrolled in further part-time education, whereas maybe we can take out only now. There were less than 800,000 females enrolled in part-time further education. Oopsie, and we need the little dash there. Very good. So that's the first comparison we can make. Let's now look at right at the end here, because this is where we see the big changes. In part-time education, we can see that female part-time education really skyrocketed, whereas the male part-time education took a bit of a dip. So we can write that. We can say in the 1990s, we can see here, this is 1990 to 1991. So in the between 1990, the year 1990 and 1991. Okay, so we're not in the 1970s. We're only in the year 1970 to 1971. Okay, so it's every 10 years they take a 2-year reading. So we're going to change all of this here. So we can say between 1970 and 1971. Okay, so this is just the 2 years. It's not the whole decade, the whole 10 years. And we can change that as well. In our next paragraph, we're going to talk about 1990 and 1991. We can say between 1990 and 1991, the number of part-time men and women, okay, what happened to the number of part-time men and women studying? We can see that. Did it stay the same? 1 million? No, this changed, and the number of part-time women studying increased. So we can say both of them changed. Okay, let's get down there. The number of part-time men and women, the number of men and women studying part-time, that's better English. Let's paste that, part-time, changed. The number of men decreased to, okay, the number of men studying part-time decreased to around, we can sort of say that's around, if we draw a line from the top of this bar, we can say around 900,000. Okay, the number of men decreased to around, we don't know for sure, we don't have an exact reading. So the number of men decreased to around 9. It's better to write out the whole number when speaking formally. 900,000. Whereas, we use this word again, whereas the number of women increased. Did it increase a little bit or a lot? From around 750,000 to more than 1 million. That's a big increase. So we can use a nice word here. We can say the number of men, okay, decreased to around 900,000, whereas the number of women studying part-time increased a lot. We can use a nice word here. We can say drastically increased. Increased. The number of women studying part-time drastically increased to over 1 million. How many million? 1 million or 1 million and a bit? Let's draw a little line here and see. Where does that line up to? Okay. So it's over 1 million. It's around the 1,100,000 mark. So let's call it that. So let's say around 1,100,000. 100,000. Oh, numbers get very complicated here. Cool. So those are the big changes with part-time education. Let's look at full-time education. We can talk maybe a little bit quickly generally. Let's say generally speaking, if you look at this chart, generally speaking, the number of men studying part-time at university in the UK, generally it decreased, whereas generally the number of women studying part-time in the UK increased. Okay, so we can compare these two things here. Generally speaking, the number of men studying part-time decreased, whereas again, whereas the number of women time increased. Generally speaking, and we can say, maybe add the time period here. Generally speaking, over these time periods, these separate time periods, we can say over this whole time period, one time period, the number of men studying. Okay. And we can introduce the next thought here. We can say, looking at the numbers relating to full-time study. We've looked at part-time study. Full-time study. We can say we see, and what do we see? Okay, we're looking at full-time study now, which is full-time education, which is in the black. We can see that. And maybe let's make a general comment again. We can say generally the number of men and women involved in full-time education. Did it go up or down? It went up, it increased. So let's write that down. Looking at the numbers relating to full-time study, we see that generally both gender groups, a gender, male or female, a gender, both gender groups increased in number. Okay, both gender groups increased in number, meaning both male and females. There were more male and females studying full-time over this time period. Let's make a comment on the number of males studying in 1970 and 71 period to the number in the 1990 to 1991 period. So we can say, what does this look like? It looks like around 100,000. Okay, so we can say, let's use a different way of saying this now. In the 1970 to 71 period, there were around 100,000. 100,000 males studying further education, higher education, university. There were around 100,000 males studying further full time. We can talk about this number. This number, what happened to the number of men studying full time? This number increased to, we can call that, okay, so this isn't near the 300,000 mark. It's more towards the 200,000 mark. So we can call this just over 200,000. Okay. Around 100,000. This number increased to just over 2, and this number increased to just over 200,000 males. Okay, we don't need to say that again. In the 1990-91 period. Okay. Now, both the males increased in number and the females increased in number. So this is the same. it's similar. So we can use a nice word here. We can say similarly. Oh, I haven't spelled that right. Spell check. Okay, only one L. Similarly. The number of women studying full-time, need a dash there, also increased in this period with, we see what it started out as with, now we add, here's our mark over here, this 100,000 mark is there, and this is just, let's call it something like that. This number is just underneath 100,000. Okay, so we had just more than we had earlier. Now we're going to have just less than. Okay, we're going to say less than. With less than 100,000 females studying in the 1970s, the 1970 to 71 period, and increasing to, how much is this? Over 200,000. Let's call it over 200,000. Increasing to over 200. Increasing to over 200,000 females studying in the 1990 to 91 period. Cool. Maybe we can write a little bit of a conclusion. We can say, so as we can see, generally speaking, the number of males studying part-time has decreased, while the number of females has increased. Let's now write a nice conclusion here. We can even say, in conclusion, we see that the number, we can maybe say it like this. We see that with part-time education, the number of males involved. I'm just using different ways of saying things, so you can choose whatever. Part-time education, the number of males involved has decreased, while the number of females involved has increased. And we can say, looking at full-time study, we can say, but when looking at full-time study, both groups, male and female, have increased in number over these 3 periods. Thank you very much, everybody. If you'd like lessons in Da Nang, or if you'd like lessons online, please leave a comment below and we'll get back to you. Xin cảm ơn và hẹn gặp lại. Ba Tân Vlog. Ba Tân ở đâu?
Xin chào tất cả các cháu đã quay trở lại kênh của bà Tân Vlog.
Xin chào. Xin cảm ơn.